Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. In 2019, Canada's oil and gas exports were valued at $102 billion, representing about 20% of our total exports in Canada, thereby making it Canada's largest export. Suffice to say, Canada punches above its weight when it comes to oil and gas. But getting our product to refineries and to market is a bottleneck for our energy sector. U.S. President Joe Biden, on his very first day in office, signed an executive order canceling the Keystone XL pipeline. Well, we're going to pick apart this topic today and examine the importance of this pipeline and the significance of this cancellation, not just for our exports, but also for U.S.-Canada relations going forward. Joining me now for this discussion is Jonathan Denis of Guardian Law and former Attorney General of Alberta, as well as David Yager, energy policy analyst and author of From Miracle to Menace, Alberta, A Carbon Story. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to really unpacking Keystone XL and why this issue really is important and why more Canadians ought to pay attention. So thank you very much. I guess we'll start with you, David. Can you please, just to bring our viewers up to speed, explain to them what is the Keystone Pipeline and what is the XL Keystone Pipeline?
The Keystone Pipeline was the original link built to the refining hub or distribution hub of Cushing, Oklahoma. It actually went on stream in 2010. What happened in the first decade of this century, there was an explosive growth in oil sands production. Actually, it was unlimited. So as production capacity in Alberta kept ramping up, they kept building more pipelines. So there was quite a number of pipelines built. This all occurred under the Harper era. And there was never any thought that pipelines were a problem. There was growing capacity up in Fort McMurray in the oil sands, growing demand in the United States, great interest of the refiners, particularly in the Gulf Coast and the central U.S., of getting more heavy oil as to handle. So in 2008, Keystone Keystone, the original Keystone line, took a couple of turns. The idea was, it was really ConocoPhillips was one of the major backers, which is a U.S. company, said, let's put a straight line from Hardisty, Alberta to Cushing, Oklahoma, call it Keystone XL, XL being for expressway. And they began in 2008. I just checked out the dates. And in 2008, we're building pipelines like crazy. The original Keystone was under construction, about to carry oil. And nobody ever thought that pipelines were a problem. It was actually got first approval by the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington in 2010. And then pretty well the last happy day that developers ever had, actually. So that's what the pipeline is, 870,000 barrels a day. It was going to be one more building block and just a great economic opportunity, because it's not just the pipeline that makes money. It's the development of the oil and the production of the oil on the other side. That's a hunk of oil that would have been a great permanent boost to the Canadian economy, probably for the 40-year life of the supply of oil on the top end of the pipeline in Alberta.
Okay, so you highlighted, thank you very much for explicating, how the pipeline is developed and what the XL component is. You roughly went over some of the importance to Canada, but maybe I'll ask Jonathan, if you don't mind. Can you explain why this pipeline is so significant and important to Canada?
Okay, so first off, I want to go back just a little bit, and David is always a very difficult act to follow with his experience in the energy industry. But what really is happening here is we cannot get adequate market access for our oil and gas. And I'm not one of these global warming deniers. In fact, I don't know of anybody really who is. But we need to understand that for the foreseeable future, the world does need access to energy. And Alberta's energy sector has the highest environmental standards, highest human rights standards in the world, a politically stable supply of energy. And what's been happening to this province is just absolutely heartbreaking. I own property in downtown Calgary, commercial property. We have a 25% vacancy rate, and a lot of it is as a result of the laws that the Trudeau government is passing, which is restricting new pipeline construction.
Right.
Well, I did the what and Jonathan did the why. So I think you've got a good idea of the picture of the background here.
No, definitely. Very much so. So, I mean, we only have about half a minute before we take our first commercial break. But my question, I guess, you mentioned that the Keystone XL had approval in 2010. Am I correct, David?
Yes. Oh, yeah. The initial environmental approval. Remember, all the cancellations, the first cancellation in 2015 and the one just almost the other day, 6 weeks ago, were based on environmental grounds. But the original decision, when this went before the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington,
right,
was this had no material impact on the environment because they thought the United States was going to get the oil from somewhere anyway.
Right.
And pipeline was the safest way to
Okay,
get it.
and I'm gonna have to cut you off there because we've got to cut to commercial break. But I'm going to talk to you about the significance about that date right when we return. Stick around. Welcome back. We're having a lively discussion on Keystone XL, the cancellation of this pipeline with David Yager and Jonathan Denis. Jonathan, just before commercial, you wanted to follow up with something that David said. Please continue.
Yeah, Keystone XL, if it was actually built, was actually going to be a net zero project. It was going to deliver a politically stable supply of crude oil to the United States from a region like Alberta that has the highest social and economic environmental standards pretty well in the entire world relating to energy. So this was purely a political decision by the Biden administration designed to appease the base that elected him.
Okay, so hold on a second, because we mentioned that in 2010, the EPA, based out of Washington, approved this pipeline and got their approval. Well, who was vice president in 2010? Wasn't it Joe Biden?
He's been around, yeah.
Okay, did I guess this right?
Yeah.
So what happened?
I don't know if he remembered he did it the first time.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, why did he do this now? So he approved it. He was, at least morally, he has signed off on this in 2010. Why the about face now?
I would say that this is entirely political. It's there's really no reason as to why you'd want to actually cancel the pipeline, but rather than a political move on his part to actually go and appease the base of voters that elected him. There really is no empirical reason as to why you'd want to cut that particular pipeline off. Like, why would you want to import oil from across the entire world, which of course is going to cost more emissions in transportation, when you have a supply right by one of your greatest trading partners, your best friend, Canada.
Definitely. Go ahead, David.
Sorry. Well, just about that time, 2010, that's kind of a pivotal time. That is, and we don't talk about this very much on this end of the pipeline, but Enbridge had a terrible spill in the Kalamazoo River in 2010 in Michigan. And it's almost like Dennis McConaughey, who was vice president with TransCanada, was heavily involved in this project, wrote a book called Dysfunction a few years ago. And he sort of said the environmental movement was looking for a crusade and climate change was interesting, but there was this oil spill and there was this pipeline. And the environmentalists got a hold of this thing, and there was no peace since. This is the first walkouts on the protests started in the United States. So the pipelines and that particular issue were not necessarily politicized until it became an event. And actually, if you look back, and I just made some notes here, if you look at the history of the world, nuclear power is always thought to be safe. Then you have an event like Chernobyl, 3 mile under Fukushima, then all of a sudden it's not safe anymore.
Right. And
the politicians go over here. Or you have another event like the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Suddenly tankers aren't safe. Well, we had this pipeline rupture the same year as the Macondo blowout. And all of a sudden, now pipelines aren't safe. So it was a little bit of bad luck in there. But starting in 2010 was when the anti-Keystone pipeline movement really got legs. And the EPA rescinded its review, did another review for political reasons. In 2011, they issued another one, came out with the same conclusion. A year later, this has got no impact. And the pressure was on Obama until finally at 2015, on the way out sort of in the tail end of his term after Trudeau was elected, he said, well, let's kill the damn thing. It was unprecedented, really.
And Obama completely dragged it out to the very end, as Dave said, like he was just playing the drag and stall game, and it kills it at the very end. Trump, love him or hate him, goes ahead with it. The governor of Alberta puts in $1.3 billion to it. And then at the end of the day, first day in office, Biden cancels that. And I would highly doubt that he will go back on that.
Okay, so first of all, I guess let me ask you another question about what U.S. President Joe Biden has done. So does he actually have the authority to do this? I mean, this is a pipeline that, yes, this segment is in America, but really it's transporting energy between two countries. America's dependent on this energy. We're dependent to get this product out. Does he have the authority to do this? And can anyone challenge him on this?
From a strictly legal perspective, yes, he does. Now, that potentially does leave him open to damages under NAFTA. But I will tell you this, is that precisely no country has ever got damages from the United States under that clause in NAFTA. Nobody.
Obama canceled a permit in 2015. And Premier Kenney helped build the pipe under the border, the cross-border. They dug and buried the cross-border section so that Biden would have to cancel a pipeline, not a permit. It's not quite catching oil yet. So Jonathan, so they thought if from a legal perspective, a permit is really easy to do. Unfortunately, TransCanada at that time, TC Energy today, had already spent something like $2.7 billion, was in the process of suing the White House when Trump got elected, reversed everything and let him get going again. But that was the gambit that Alberta played. Let's put up some money into this project and let's get it buried and then see if he's going to actually cancel an existing pipe.
Welcome back. We're talking about the canceled Keystone XL pipeline that runs between Alberta to the United States. This is definitely posing a huge problem. We're talking about and unpacking the situation here. Gentlemen, we know that Alberta is dependent on this pipeline to get a lot of its bitumen out. Now that they are not going to be able to transport it through the Keystone XL, what are the alternatives? Obviously, there has been some, with merit or without merit concerns from the environmental activist groups. Well, what are the alternatives, and would those appease the environmental activists?
I'll take a stab at that. There's a couple of other proposals. One is a rail line to Alaska. And this was an alternative to pipe. Instead of going south, and instead of having to go through BC, we'd actually go north across the Yukon and come out in Alaska. And that is sort of co-sponsored by some of the indigenous groups along the way. Okay. And they would originally start with a rail line and then build a right-of-way. Of course, the Prime Minister has already said, well, wait a second, that will not escape Bill C-69, the major project review. There is another idea. They bought the rail line to Hudson's Bay. So there is another proposal I've seen of creating a rail line and a right-of-way to Hudson's Bay. They've got a little bit of problem with Hudson's Bay, but a great thing about there, you don't have to deal with Ontario, Quebec, or BC. You deal with Saskatchewan, Manitoba. That would have some challenges in the winter when Hudson's Bay freezes over, because global warming hasn't quite got to it yet, probably never will. So, but this is not, ice-breaking tankers to move oil is not unknown. So there are two, if we get the momentum behind doing it, but the fact it doesn't exist is definitely a setback.
Okay, transporting oil via tanker, transporting oil via rail car, to me doesn't seem environmentally safer. In fact, I think it would be considered worse than transporting it via pipeline. Jonathan, am I off here? Does this not seem obvious to everybody?
It's very obvious here, but again, the agenda behind a lot of these groups opposing these pipelines is not economic development. It's not prosperity of our society. It's not employment. It's rather just to constrict and restrict the exports from coming from Alberta. I just want to touch on a point that Dave made about Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines Act. That, again, is a Trudeau legislation. It makes regulatory and environmental review process more onerous, raises the risk of litigation, and generally has a chilling effect on pipelines. And the cynic in me would say that that's what its intended purpose was to do.
There's an open question. If you wanted to build a brand new pipeline today, the problem with Bill C-69 is not it's the regulatory process. It's the fact that the ultimate decision lies in cabinet. And the chill that Jonathan's referring to is just how much money are you prepared to spend on the project, on the approvals, on the environmental impact, on the consultation, only discover it gets to Canada and gets cut off. And that is the one thing about pipelines people don't understand. Enbridge spent $800 million on Northern Gateway before Trudeau canceled that. TransCanada spent $1 billion on Energy East. This is not a career-enhancing move for a pipeline company to spend hundreds of millions or billions of dollars on pipelines that aren't going to get approved. So Jonathan is bang on the money. Bill C-69, the reason it's called the No Pipelines Act is what board of directors or what private company is going to put forward this kind of money with an uncertain outcome.
Well, that's a good point.
That's why we're having such a hard time raising capital here internationally, because there's this negative perception.
Well, it's a good point because, as I think we mentioned it earlier, Alberta invested $1.5 billion and committed $6 billion in loan guarantees. I believe those are the figures for Keystone XL. Well, what happens to this money now? This is hard cash. What happens?
There's no loan to guarantee. I mean, that was the project financing. If they don't build it, that part will never be activated. They had, I think it was up to 1.5 billion, wasn't it, Jonathan? I don't think they used it all. And there will be attempts to recover this again, Jonathan.
I'm not that optimistic. That
I know you're not. I'm not either. I'm just doing my job by reporting what the Premier said.
Anybody who knows me for 5 minutes knows I'm very proud of the legal profession. I'll tell you what, if we go out there, the only people that win are the lawyers.
Yeah. So they'll try to get it back. It's too bad. The Premier's getting pilloried for that. I looked at all the money that was spent on. There was jobs. There was ditch dug, pipe buried, jobs created. There was a lot of money put into job creation. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars across the country. Look at the deficit. The idea that this is the one that of all the money that was spent, good and bad, on trying to keep the economy going last year. The idea this is the worst decision made. I think it's got a lot of competition.
Okay, just before we go to commercial, 20 seconds. How many jobs has this impacted with the canceling of Keystone XL? Anybody?
Yes, I would say that there was the CAP forecast, and I would say it will be in the hundreds of thousands. CAP's latest forecast was there was oil projects on the books.
Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion on the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline with Jonathan Denis and David Yager. Thank you both very much for joining me again. It's been a very insightful discussion. Just before we went to commercial, we were talking about the amount of Canadian jobs that would be lost due to the cancellation of this pipeline. There also is a consideration of American jobs. Jonathan, do you have some figures for me?
I don't have a specific figure, but there obviously are job losses as a result of Biden's decision to cancel Keystone XL, not just in Canada, but south of the 49th parallel as well, because there were the construction jobs and also the management jobs and the oil and gas jobs down in Texas that would have been created as a result of this, again, from a stable source of energy from your politically best friend.
Right. And the states are upset as well because what they get is property taxes on the right of way.
Right.
I mean, that is just as a pipeline coming through private land is just an annuity. It's out of sight, out of mind, and the checks come in every month.
And I think it's important to remember that basically, if Alberta oil and can't get down to Texas for refinement and processing, well, they're just going to have to take some other foreign oil and from some other powers that aren't as environmentally conscientious as Alberta is with their production of oil. Okay, what would we like to see? We have to think about solutions here. So obviously, this doesn't seem like it's going to work out for us with Keystone XL. It's pretty much dead in the water. So what action would you like to see our government take, Jonathan?
So the first thing I would want to do is repeal Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines Act. If I would like to see this as part of Aaron O'Toole's campaign pledge, is that he's going to repeal Bill C-69 so we can actually get some capital back into Canada and actually some confidence from investors and actually start building some of these projects.
I would like to make sure there's two other pipelines under construction. Enbridge Line 3 is replacing one of its older lines. The environmental movement in the United States was emboldened by that. And so there's continuous protests on the right of way through Minnesota. Right. That has been tied up in the courts for years, but fortunately it got through the last batch of legal hurdles. If the Biden supporters or the people that support the Keystone cancellation have their way, that won't work either. That's 370,000 feet. That's a nice piece of pipe. Trans Mountain, that is just the awfulest example of infrastructure blocking and government interference ever known. That thing is being built, the pipe's being buried, but there is a committed cadre of environmental activists all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Wow. That will not be happy until that thing is not done. So in the short term, in addition to the political aspects of giving us some legislation so somebody will trust that Canada's the safe place to invest. It used to be before the current administration came in. For gosh sakes, let's get those two pieces of pipe that are partially built done.
Well, that's a good point.
That was the whole point about burying that pipe at the border. That was a partially built pipeline he canceled, not a permit. And so we should be apprehensive here and be diligent and say, and the Prime Minister, we need the Prime Minister on this file. We need his ability to talk some sense into the President of the United States has got to keep actively pressing to make sure that Enbridge Line 3, the replacement, is not blocked And the same thing with, and hopefully he finishes.
Dave, you're much more optimistic than me with this current prime minister. We simply need no new leadership in Canada because there is none at the top.
Well, you know what, it's an interesting point. We can't control American laws. We can't control anything that happens south of the border. I mean, we can influence, we can take legal action, but we can't control what goes on in Canada. And I think it sounds like, based on what you've said, Jonathan, that the Trudeau government hasn't been very helpful, or has it? Sounds like it's been more hurtful. I don't know. Maybe sum it up. We have about 45 seconds here left.
Well, there's also Bill C-48, the No More Oil Tankers Act, which restricts the ability to export crude off of BC's coast. Like, the list just keeps going on and on and on. I'm very pessimistic that any of this is going to change under the current administration.
The governor of Michigan is trying to stop Enbridge Line 5, which brings Alberta oil to southern Ontario. Now we finally found a pipeline they love, where they vote Liberal, which is southern Ontario and Quebec, and they want to cut that off too. And so this transborder energy thing has gone from partnership and decades of trust to chaos, absolute chaos. And KXL is just one little piece of an incredibly complex puzzle. I look at the oil shortages of the 70s and all the security supply issue, the transporter trade, the free trade agreement, and I look at the chaos we're in now. It is breathtaking. It's the best thing.
Not going to get any better.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much for this lively discussion. I appreciate your insights here. Well, with Keystone XL canceled by our U.S. neighbors, we're going to have to see if Canada will step up to the plate with legislation to enhance and definitely improve the situation with exporting our Canadian oil and gas. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.